Mr. Speaker, will you please call the House to order?
The bill is passed.
We'd like to get a budget that represents the interests of the people who are standing here with me now.
To be part of the struggle to achieve a better society for all.
This is really a great day for democracy in New York.
Hello and welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Liz Koenig. Today we're going to be talking about the governor's proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year with our guest, Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz, who represents the 81st Assembly District in the Bronx. Thank you very much for coming in.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Very good to see you. Now, so the governor gave his budget address recently, and there wasn't a lot of detail in it, unfortunately. So you really need to kind of sift through the documents yourself to get to the meat of things. What did you think generally of the governor's address?
Well, it did take an hour, and yet there were not a lot of details. So he talked more in generalities. He talked about, all the gigantic capital projects that have been, happening in New York under his leadership. The new Tappan Zee Bridge. The Mario M. Cuomo Tappan Zee Bridge, LaGuardia Airport, and just a whole list of things. The new bridge in Brooklyn and Queens, the Kosciuszko Bridge. I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing it right. And lots of stuff like that. All good stuff, I think. I'm not sure how we're paying for it all, but I'm sure we will. He said he wants to raise healthcare by 3%, education by 3%. We have this multi-billion-dollar deficit. It wasn't clear to me yet how we're going to both deal with the deficit and deal with increases of 3%, which actually is very significant. I think it's great that education money is going up by 3%. I wish we could do more, in fact. So that's unclear. He talked about cutting taxes for the middle class. Sounds great. Cutting taxes for small businesses. I'm not sure how he defines small business, but that's giving up revenue. So cutting taxes, huge deficit. How do you do that? So the devil's in the details. It wasn't clear in the budget address how he's going to do that. It seems to me that we have to get more money in somehow. Many of us would like to see a fairer tax that brings in more revenue from the people at the very, very, very top, billionaires. So those details we don't have yet, and we need to have them. But we're in the beginning of a process. He created or recreated this Medicaid redesign team, the MRT. That's something that he did in, I think it was 2011, to deal with the crisis in Medicaid. And of course, Medicaid is much more expensive now for the state. There are more people who are benefiting from Medicaid, and some people may think that's bad, but in many ways it's good, because it means that more people have health care. Most New Yorkers have some kind of health care now, and that's largely because of Obamacare, because of the expansion of Medicaid, and that's good, but things cost money. So all those little details are unclear, but the MRT is going to be making recommendations which many of us may not like. Are they going to suggest cuts to hospitals or to nursing homes or to home care? Are they going to suggest perhaps not that, but instead imposing various kinds of taxes or fees on companies that deliver healthcare, which of course gets passed on to consumers? So or a combination of all of those. So whatever it is, it's probably not going to be great news, in my opinion. I don't get a feeling that there's a strong commitment to do everything the way we would like to do it. But we have a 2-month process, a 2-month plus process ahead of us, which would involve a lot of discussions and negotiations. But I think the first thing we have to do is really analyze every line in his proposal, because he submitted his budget bills the other night. And now we have to look and see exactly what's in there. Not what he said at the budget address, but what they put in there, because those are bills, they're budget bills, just like any other legislation. And that's the starting point from where we deal with the budget. Eventually, the Assembly and the Senate will both submit one-house budget resolutions, and then we'll try to reconcile those. There'll be negotiations, two-way and three-way negotiations. So we're at the very beginning of the process, but I'm very concerned about where it may take us.
Now, you mentioned the 3% increase in school funding. It's still not enough to make New York City schools whole.
No. First of all, the state provides about approximately 40% of New York City's school funds. So about half or more comes from the city, and about 40% comes from the state. There's money from the federal government, but it's around 40%. But and this has been going on for years based on the successful resolution of the CFE, Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit. We're entitled, as are others around the state, but we're entitled to much more than what's going to be proposed. And while you can't solve every problem with money, one thing I'm positive about is that more money is better than less money when it comes to, I don't know, paying teachers, buying books, buying equipment. So we need the funds. The fact is, a kid in a school in a poor area, probably less than half, maybe even only a third of the amount of money is spent on that kid than in the wealthy areas. And every kid deserves to have an equal chance. And if some kids have much more in terms of resources than others, they're going to, they're starting out on second base, so to speak. And the kids in the poorer communities, many of which are in the Bronx, for example, they start out behind and they probably end up behind. And that's not right.
Now, what about in the area of higher education? I know there have been proposed cuts to TAP in previous years. Is that something we might be seeing this year? Well,
that's one of those things we have to analyze, because I haven't read every line in the multi-thousand-page budget bill. But one thing the governor is proposing is to increase this Excelsior Scholarship Program, which is a program that mainly helps middle-class families. It doesn't really do much for poor families, but a lot of those families get other kinds of aid. So he wants to expand it by expanding the maximum income that the family can have in order to be eligible. He wants to expand it up to $150,000. Now, some people may think that's a lot of money, but these days $150,000 is middle class. I mean, it's not rich.
No, that's for sure.
I mean, it's comfortable for sure, but it's certainly not rich. I think we should give every kid the opportunity to go to a city or state college. After all, I went to City University, and there was no tuition when I went, and I would not have been able to afford to go to college but for the fact that there was no tuition. We didn't have the resources, so it was never even an option to apply for some of the private colleges. I never even considered it, and that was true for a lot of people. So in my time, we got free college tuition, and I think kids today ought to have that same opportunity that I had.
I'm starting the process with my older daughter now, and I'm pushing her kind of towards the state school. So we'll see where that goes.
Well, I think that's a good bet. I mean, the state schools the SUNY schools are very good.
Absolutely.
And much more reasonable, although still expensive, but much more reasonable than the private colleges. In fact, during the last recession, a good number of people who formerly had their kids go to private schools, they had them apply for SUNY, which made the competition to get into schools like Binghamton and other schools much more competitive, meaning there were more people competing for the same number of seats. And some people got closed out as a result. But I think a lot more people started to understand what a wonderful thing it is to have the state university and the city university, and have them affordable, or at least more affordable for families in New York.
And back to the governor's budget proposal in the area of transportation. Obviously, there have been a lot of problems with the MTA. Any solutions to some of the issues we've been seeing in transportation in the city?
Well, the MTA always needs more money, and one of the things we want to make sure is that when we allocate money to the MTA, that it goes to the MTA. That's why when my lockbox law was passed a couple of years ago, it was really very important, because prior to that, money that was earmarked for the MTA was sometimes diverted to other areas in the budget. The MTA has tremendous needs both on the operating side and on the capital side. They have the latest 5-year capital plan, which involves billions, tens of billions of dollars in much needed upgrades, new trains, new tracks, new signals, making more and more stations handicapped accessible. There are so many needs there, but on the operating side, we want to make sure that we have enough funding so that, for example, in the Bronx, in our area, we have adequate bus service. You know, when people think of MTA, they mostly think about the trains, but in our communities that I represent, a lot of people don't take the trains. They don't go downtown. They take the buses within the communities, and the bus service is not so good, and we have to do something about that. And I've been pushing for them to provide more buses, and I mean, they're trying to modernize or update the bus routes, but there's not going to be too many changes in my area. But I'm concerned that one neighborhood in particular in my district, Norwood, is going to lose out with some of the suggestions that they've come up with. So I've been working very hard to try to make sure we don't lose any service. I mean, it would have been nice if we got increases. And we have one particular bus line, we have several bus lines that are problems, but one particular one, the number 10 bus, which runs from the northern tip of Riverdale through Kingsbridge, across Van Cortlandt Village into Norwood, so it covers most of the neighborhoods in my district. We need more buses. The buses are severely overcrowded. The waits are too long, and that only comes with funding, and so we need to put the money in.
Now, so here we are at this point in the process. So the budget hearings begin next week, and then where do we go from there?
There'll be, over a period of several weeks, there'll be budget hearings on the various areas of the budget. So the one that's directly relevant to the committee that I chair, which is the Judiciary Committee, it's called the Public Protection Committee. So the members of the Ways and Means Committee plus members of Judiciary Codes and Corrections will be hearing testimony from the various state agencies, commissioners, advocates, and others on the needs in the budget. So areas like civil legal services that help people with things like foreclosure prevention is one example. These will all be aired during those hearings, and then there'll be hearings in every other area, in education, environment, higher education, just housing, a number of different areas. While that's going on, we'll be within our own conference discussing the governor's proposals, and after we go through that round of discussion, then we'll start to discuss what we want to propose. I mean, knowing that, you know, most of the budget, well over 90% of it is what it is, but it's the rest of that we debate about all the time, and we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we do, but we look forward to hearing more about it. Thank you.
Okay.
We've been speaking with Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz, who represents the 81st Assembly District in the Bronx. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.